Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Recollection Step, a Grand Archive TCG Podcast, part of the Maindeck podcast family. I'm Dan.
And I'm Taylor. Welcome, everyone. This week, we're going to be going over everybody's favorite topic in TCGs, it seems like, is which cards should be banned. No, we're not doing that. Actually, we will be talking about the banned and restricted list and how that all works, because I think there are like a fair number of questions about how it kind of just works in general, especially with Weebs of the Shore. They've got like a tiered system almost, but we'll get into that in a little bit. Before we get into that,
let's be honest though, Taylor, everyone really does love talking about which cards should be banned.
I mean, that was like a jab for sure. Because it was not untrue.
I certainly do like to talk mostly about when I think cards shouldn't be banned. But there are definitely cases where they should be as well. And I don't like you said, I don't know if we're going to speculate too much on like which cards that exist currently should be banned or anything. But I think a lot of this will just focus around how Grand Archive's ban list system works, and talking about the cards that are on the list and just kind of some of the reasons why they might deserve or not deserve to be on the list.
Yeah, exactly. Before we get into all that though, what have you been playing lately? You came back from Houston. You went in and you were really high on Erupting. You came back from Houston and you were less high on Erupting. So what have you been playing lately?
It's really easy to be less high on Erupting after the day 2 that I had. It wasn't hard. It was pretty much just flip the switch. And then I have a couple decks I've been playing lately. I have mostly been playing Water Tony Allies. One of the things, actually I want to give a shout out to Ryan at who's one of the top 8 at Nationals, who was playing Water Tony Allies. Who I played him during the rounds. He was an incredible, super skilled, super clean player. And he played that list, and I had been looking and talking about Water Ally lists for a little bit. I played a little Water Lorraine Allies. We were messing around with some Diana variants. But when I saw how that deck played, and I saw the options that Tony gets with it, and mostly when he just like dunked on me with a heavy swing, I was like, oh yeah, that's really cool that this deck can just go, nah, actually you're just dead.
Heavy Swing is probably one of like the most like slept on cool cards in the game. Like
I don't think it's slept on. I don't think I'm going to say it's slept on.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. I want to call it underappreciated because it's just like in how effective it is, and it's just a big dumb attack that hits for 6, and it's beautiful. It's exactly what Tony should be doing.
What I like to call cards like that, cards like that have the vibe of it ain't much, but it's honest work. It's just exactly. It's not flashy, it's not special, but you pay the cost, you get the damage, and you're usually pretty satisfied with that. Yeah, it's good. It's a good card. I like that. I like the taunt. Actually, getting that level 1 taunt is sometimes really clutch when you're playing that game where you're trying to keep your Gildas alive or whatever. That is a cool little extra bit that you can get, that and the opponent doesn't always know that. They don't know which champion you're on with Water Allies necessarily. You sit at level 1 for a little bit. You can like surprise them, be like, oh, it's Tony actually. Now you can't use your allies, so I hope you have a different plan to get rid of this Gildas. And I really like his all the protection options. I find things like Storm of Thorns to be really fun. That has some surprisingly powerful turns with cards like that.
I expect we'll see Storm of Thorns show up in a lot of actually non-Guardian lists. That card has been a lot more impactful than I thought it would be when I first saw it. Turns out just like stopping 1 damage from everything in a turn is pretty good. It's no Resolute stand, but it gets the job done. And it even just like stops things from like clumsy apprentice from attacking like for that turn, because it just dies. So like a lot of utility in that card, even if you don't have floating memory.
There's an interesting thing that happens with the opponent sometimes when you play an effect like that. It could be, Resolute Stand obviously can do stuff like this, but Sword of Thorns is, because it's so much weaker, makes the decision the opponent has becomes really weird, where they can commit everything to push damage through, because it's like, well, it's only reducing 1 damage. Like everything still does plenty of damage. But the problem is, usually when you're doing that, their goal is to kind of, with like a Xander deck or whatever, is commit everything and kill you that turn. So the opponent has to decide, like, well, is that 1 damage reduction worth just passing turn and skipping? Like, okay, I'm not going to run into it because it's preventing a bunch of damage. And I think a lot of opponents in a lot of situations, they'll probably think, well, like, no, it's probably still just to push the damage and get close to death. But either way, when you have to do that, it usually puts you totally shields down at the end of the turn. So there's like almost a little nuanced, sneaky value to that, where your opponent's going to not kill you, but in order to not kill you, they're still going to just like go completely defenseless, and then Tony swings damage on him or something. Whereas, if they should choose to be conservative around it, they go, ooh, -1 damage. I guess I'm just not going to push damage. That's exactly what you wanted to happen too, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's better than it looks, I think.
Yep, 100%.
So I've been playing that, and then so listeners will probably really enjoy that. A few days ago, I actually put back together the Wind Hybrid list that we both decided that we hated, but I fixed it. I think I have a better version.
Different than what we were trying to put together, for sure. Yep.
I'm really pumped on that right now. I'm excited to play that. So let's see. This is going up. This is going up Friday. So the following week, I'm going to give a little teaser. There's going to be, unless something delays things, but there will be a video on each channel, Maindeck and Red Zone Rogue. Red Zone Rogue and Maindeck will have a little collab happening where Kel and I played some games the past week, and we have a couple games to show you guys that we're going to put one on each channel. So that'll be really fun. I think, a lot of people ask me to do gameplay all the time, and I never do, but Kel asked me to, and I said, well, I'll do it for you, Kel. So well, no, it's, like I keep telling everyone, I want to do really nice in-person gameplay, but I can't do that with Kel anyway. Mm-hmm. But when he reached out and asked, I thought, yeah, that'd be a fun thing to do. So I'm playing each of those decks in one of those, in each of those videos, basically one video, one deck. So, yeah, I just hope you guys check that out. If you want to see me playing the decks that I've been enjoying playing right now, check out those videos when they come out next week.
Oh yeah, that sounds like a really good time.
How about you, Taylor? What have you been playing?
I have been just completely enamored with what we are affectionately calling the Wind starter deck. Yeah, that deck is just so much fun. It has a lot of like fun lines. Getting to just rush down with a bunch of captains and banner knights is sweet. Being able to find the cards you want when you want them with Rally of the Peasants and Fairy Whispers is really cool. It gives the deck a lot of play in a lot of situations where normally you wouldn't really expect it to compete. Like it just puts a lot of damage out of nowhere against Erupting and Luxem. It holds off allies really well with Dream Fairies and Veiling Breezes and Zephyrs and Reclaims, and like it does a lot of different things, and it does them all like significantly better than you would think for a deck trying to do a lot of these things. And I've been experimenting with trying to fit Rose in as well, because Rose is just a sweet card. She's very impactful. Anytime you can like play her and redirect an attack is usually just like crippling for the opponent, because it just destroys their turn. Like the 3 health is like pretty important, and then just the bonus 1 health to get her to 4 is kind of insane actually when you play her at fast speed like that. So yeah, I've been loving that deck so much. It's a lot of fun to play.
Yeah, we had I think we played locals last week, mm-hmm. and we were playing that deck, and I was playing Water Tony allies, and we had Did we get the third? Was it a 3-game set? Did I take one?
It was a 3-game set.
Yeah, I took the first game, and then you got me the second two, if I recall.
Yeah, you got the first game because I had Lancelots in my main deck, and then game 2 and 3 I got to side out the bad cards and play a real deck.
That Lancelot was not good.
He was not good there at all.
Well, I think if I remember right, you played him turn 1, and then I snow ferried him turn 1.
Yeah. And then I think I Zephyred him to get him back.
Yeah. You had a sick. That's right. You had the sick end of turn Zephyr so that you could have him come in. You end of. I'm trying to remember now.
It was So I play him my turn. He's hindered.
Yes.
Your turn. You snow ferry him, even though he's rested already, which obviously makes sense still because he won't awake. And then, end of your turn, I Zephyr him, so he wakes up anyway.
Right.
And
not end of
your turn. It was
end of my main phase. Yeah. End of my main phase, you Zephyr him just so that he comes back in, but he's no longer impacted by the snow fairy, and then he can rest. He can awaken on your turn. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
So sick.
Yeah.
And then I think I did something to stifle him later again or something.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Yeah. It was. Yeah. It got kind of rough. But Lancelot's another card I want to make work somehow. I think he just hitting for 5 is a lot of damage, and he does it repeatedly. So I think there's something there somewhere, even if into ally decks he's probably not the best. Just it's hard to defend him all the time. But I mean, when you get to level 2 with Lorraine as well, he has 5 health. So I mean, he just becomes this giant beast, just for playing the game essentially.
5 health is that's at that level where it's just very few things that people actively run in their decks can actually do anything about that.
Yep.
And one of them is in category 1 on the ban list as well.
Yes. Yep. Exactly. So it goes to show how powerful that can be. Actually, 2 of them. But we'll get into that here.
I think Sure. Yeah,
well, freezing hail also kind of works
because
he comes in rested.
Three technically then.
Yeah. Okay. We'll say 3 technically.
I mean, it would be a weird scenario, but it's those they happen. I mean, so.
Yeah, we did it in Houston a couple times. So
yes, for sure we did. Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe that's a segue.
That is,
or
a
maybe
segue.
It's not.
No, it is a segue.
Okay, excellent. Well, before we start talking about the ban list in more detail, then I just have to mention to everyone, if you enjoy Recollection Step, a Grand Archive TCG podcast, or you enjoy Main Deck in general and you like to support us, there are a couple easy ways that you can do that. You can always leave a comment on the video. Let us know what you think of this episode, of the topic, your own thoughts on everything. And you can subscribe to the channel on YouTube, and you can leave a 5-star rating on Spotify or iTunes, whatever, all that stuff. Just doing all the engagement stuff is super, super helpful for us. So thank you guys so much for doing that. And then as a reminder, anytime you're shopping for Grand Archive singles and you want to you think about us just a little bit, I like what Main Deck does. I'm going to give just a little bit of kickback to them. You can always use bit.ly/shoptcgs, bit.ly/shoptcgs to go to TCG Player instead of just going to tcgplayer.com to order your singles. Obviously, one of the most common sites in the world to order singles from. I wish we had Card Market here too, but we don't. We just have TCG Player. But yeah, you can use that to shop for your singles, and we get a little bit of kickback. It doesn't cost you anything extra. So really appreciate when people do that. It helps us out more than you know. So thank you guys so much for your support in all those different ways. Now, Taylor, let's talk about all the things that should and shouldn't be banned.
Let's go. Yes. Let's start out first by just kind of defining what banned means in Grand Archive and how it's defined, and how Weebs of the Shore manages this list. There's kind of 2 sneaky things they do with it, or not sneaky, but just things that maybe are a little bit more difficult for people to understand. So first of all, they call it a banned and restricted list, while there's only cards that are banned. So the way the list works is that a card that is banned on the banned and restricted list in Grand Archive, you just cannot play any copies of that in your main deck, your material deck, or your side deck. It's just out of the format completely. There's no limited list or anything like that where you can play 1 copy of something or 2 copies of something. It's all or nothing. So a card is either in the format or it is not. And then second, they have kind of 3 tiers of what they consider problematic cards, I guess. Where only cards in the 3rd tier, category 3, are actually banned. And that that's I've seen some confusion around that as well, where like you see this list of 3 different tiers, and there's cards in each tier, and you're kind of asking yourself, are these all banned, or are they all not banned, or some of them limited, or whatever? Only cards that are in category 3 are banned. Everything else is still in the format and still legal to play. Anything in category 1 and 2 are fine. So hopefully those definitions, just getting those out of the way right away, help kind of keep you pointed north as we start our discussion here.
Well, Taylor, what the heck's the point of doing all these categories on the list then? Like, why make it confusing? Why show so many cards, but only a few of them are banned?
So a lot of it is just to kind of help, in my opinion anyway, it's to help players stay aware of what cards are potentially going to be banned in the future, so it just doesn't come out of nowhere, right? Like, no one wants to be playing a game and then you find this deck you really like, you put a lot of time and money into making it cool and improving it, and maybe you bling it out a little bit and buy some cool foils, and then banned and restricted day comes along, and all of a sudden they ban the key card in your deck and it just doesn't work anymore. That's such a huge feel bad for a lot of players, and it really turns people off from a lot of different games. That's actually been a pretty key criticism of Magic the Gathering in recent years. Actually, probably like the past 5 to 10 years even, where they've experimented a lot with kind of different banned and restricted list announcements and styles and stuff. And the common thread has just been like, all these cards are, we suspect they're problematic, but we don't actually know when they're going to be banned or if they're even being considered to be banned, and just catches a lot of people off guard. So that's one of the things I really like about what Weebs of the Shore is doing here, where they've got these 3 different categories, and each category is just kind of a different representation of kind of their watch list of cards they consider that are problematic or have the potential to be problematic. For instance, category 1, which is their lowest category, is not, none of these cards are actually banned. They describe that as, this category consists of cards that we do not consider problematic in the current environment, but are unhealthy for future balance and game design space. So yeah, none of them are actually banned at the moment, but these are just things that might be a problem in the future if there's new card designs that they release that interact with them in a weird way, or just make them much more powerful than they already are. Maybe Freezing Hail has something where its effect causes a unit to never wake up again, similar to Snow Fairy, right? That would obviously be a much, that'd be a very unintended design consequence of the current iteration of Freezing Hail. So they might bump it up at that point.
I asked the question not because I was earnestly curious, unfortunately, just to pull the curtain back, but it's the question that I've seen from people a lot, just about doing this, not necessarily always as explicitly or aggressively as I was asking it, but I mean, you brought up Magic the Gathering. I want to bring up a reference to another card game that every time I've talked about this with players of this card game, I've never gotten anyone to disagree with me on this. They all go, oh yeah, it's exactly like that. Taylor, you've played some Yu-Gi-Oh too, right?
It's been a while. Yeah, but yep, I have.
Yu-Gi-Oh is a game where every time I talk with the Yu-Gi-Oh players, having played it a bunch at different points in my life in the past, the general agreement is that whenever Konami decides to release a ban list, it's basically spinning a wheel. It's totally random. It's not totally random, but the way that they ban and unban things has very little discernible rhyme or reason behind it. And they, at least historically in the past, I haven't checked recently, but historically in the past, they were not accompanied by any explanation either. It was generally just, well, this thing's banned, and you go, that makes sense because that deck was tier -1. And then they go, and then we brought this card back to 3, and you go, why would you do that? That sounds so bad now. And when we banned this thing, it's like, that wasn't even a good deck. You didn't. But they wouldn't explain anything, right? And I love bringing that one up in particular because I know a lot of people have played Yu-Gi-Oh and have felt burned by that in the past, or been especially when a card comes back that really had no right to come back, but it hasn't been reprinted. in like years. And suddenly it's like, well, okay, now I need 3 copies of that card. I sold mine because it got banned like 5 years ago, and I don't have any, and now they're really expensive. Like that kind of stuff is, to TCG players, is just infuriating. And so I appreciate Weebs of the Shore's approach here of letting us know we have this cards in category 1, which we're going to go over shortly, which are, no, they're not banned right now. They are cards that are totally playable. They're not even necessarily close to being banned, but they're ones where it's basically telling you, like, sure, you can go invest in a set of foil Erupting Rhapsodies or something, but just be aware that at some point where like something could happen, it could end up being banned. Which is just, I appreciate that kind of transparency, because a lot of people feel like Konami's lists are often, for Yu-Gi-Oh, are designed to sort of get a maximum amount of money out of the customer, and then suddenly ban those decks after they've been dominating for months, and then oops, now you have to buy a new deck, everyone. It's too bad you couldn't see that coming. So yeah, I'm not insinuating anything, but a lot of people do express that it feels that way to them. So yeah, so I appreciate that a lot. And I want to point out one more thing too about the listing for category 1 of this. Like you said, it says they're don't consider problematic in the current environment, but are unhealthy for future balance and game design space. And I think that is a very particular sentence it's easy to read a little bit more into than you need to. They are potentially going to be problematic, but they're not currently. That doesn't mean that these are going to be banned in the future. We have, in fact, already seen at least one category 1 card just fall off the list, because this list used to have Tactful Sergeant on it. But basically, the idea is that these cards, some of them could eventually, with the right cards, they could become problematic, or the format could develop in a different way. And then, maybe there's more answers to the cards. Maybe those decks just aren't actually performing well enough where it feels like it's problematic, and it might end up being like a fringe metagame deck, but nothing that's going to crush everything. So those cards can then actually fall back off as well. So this isn't, category 1 isn't there's a clock left on this card and it will be banned at some point. It's just, buyer beware. There's a potential to it, but nothing immediate.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. These are all just cards that, like, again, they've notified people like, hey, these are powerful cards, like, and they do unique things, and those unique things might interact with other unique things in the future to create some issues. But right now, actually, I would say they're all extremely acceptable cards. The first 4, there's currently 6 cards on here in the current list, current BNR list that they released in March. They are Creative Shock, Varuck, Smoldering Spire, Dream Fairy, Freezing Hail, Erupting Rhapsody, and Scepter of Lumina. And then, like Dan said, Tactful Sergeant used to be on that list as well. I think it was taken off in February. So yeah, I mean, these are all cards. They're clearly powerful cards. A lot of them are played in the best decks in the format. But these aren't cards that are just so incredibly overpowered where they're like stifling what people can do in the format, right? Like, no one is like, oh, my opponent is playing Creative Shock, I have to make sure I'm playing X to answer that. Like, it's just not a thing.
I would not for that one, but I will say for Erupting Rhapsody, people do play particular cards to answer it.
Yeah, that is very true. Thankfully, that's like an easy card to just stick in your material deck, right? So just like it's format affecting, but not necessarily format warping, because it's not like you have to devote 4 material deck slots and 12 main deck slots to fight it. Like, but anyway, the point is just that these are all again just cards that might have problems in the future. They are currently not problematic, according to Weebs of the Shore. For the most part, I agree with them as well. A lot of these, when they were put on the list, either were considered somewhat tame or like just kind of put on there very preemptively. Like Freezing Hail, a lot of people have considered to be kind of a weird card to have on there for a while. It was originally put onto this list when they made the rule change that champions do not wake up when they level. just because now like there's less or more opportunity to like keep a champion locked down for more portions of the game, which obviously is not like fun gameplay when champions are such a key part of the game itself. So like obviously there's some potential there, but again, we just haven't seen it used to that effect yet, where like it actually is going to be an issue.
When they put this on the list, it's important to remember the developers are playing a different game than we are.
Mm-hmm.
They are a few sets ahead of us. I think what did we hear? They're doing set 6 art right now.
Mm-hmm.
Which I mean, so I think they're at least at this point they're probably pretty close to done with that, I would assume.
Yep.
Which means they've got to be testing out to at least set 7 and beyond. And so when they put Freezing Hail on the list, it's really interesting just in retrospect now, because we have ALC and we've seen decks like Diana who will just pummel you every single turn with bullets for lots and lots of damage. And Tenoris also another champion who's just very swing focused depending on the deck, but like has some really massive damage sources, especially when he gets to level 3. Where Freezing Hail seems a lot like again, not actively oppressive, but potentially, depending on how a metagame develops, a card that could be checking those decks pretty easily. And the question is always basically like, is how easy is the answer to the problem that's being presented? Because if you've got a deck that presents a good problem to the opponent, it's like, okay, like I'm going to win the game if you don't deal with this. And the answer is just like, nah, you're dead. And it just totally kills the deck. Then that's, if that type of deck is a large share of the metagame, then that card is at that point, warping the metagame to the point where like it might make those decks difficult to even play at all. And the goal is always with the metagame, the goal is always to have a variety of playable decks that have good decks they're good against and decks they're bad against for a nice variety. You never want one deck to be dominant, and you never want one easy to run card to just negate other decks entirely. So it's a tightrope that you have to walk, though. It's tricky.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Quick aside, I think actually the format is in a really good spot right now. We've seen a lot of strategies pop up. And we've seen more strategies pop up since like Ascent Ontario too, which I think to me is a really big indicator that we're in a really good spot with the format. Like there's just a lot of room for experimentation at the moment, and there's some polarizing matchups for sure, where like certain decks have just like insane game against other decks, but then those decks will still lose to other decks in the format as well. So like worst case scenario, there's like a really nice rock paper scissors format going on, and I mean honestly that's a pretty good place to be. But there's even beyond that, there's just a lot of variety at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. This is not a format where I think we're ever going to look back on it and go like, boy, I'm glad we're out of those days. Like these are just, there's lots of choices. There's lots of really, really fun games to be had. There are some decks where, like you said, like, you go up against, with certain decks, you go up against like Luxem Xander, and it's like just pulling teeth to try and pull a win out there. But you don't want a format where every deck, like I said, where decks exist that just have no bad matchups. That's what we call a tier 0 format. That's what like Yu-Gi-Oh is dealing with right now, where it's like it's kind of play this deck or don't play the game, and that's best avoided in a card game. It's actually trust me, it's a good thing when your favorite deck has a deck that it's not good against. That's great. We like that.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, depending on the deck, I don't mind playing a bunch of mirror matches because it can be kind of fun. Like Wind Ally mirror matches, I think are actually like pretty cool. They're very skill intensive, right?
Yeah, ally matchups are fun. In Magic, I grew up like I cut my teeth competitively in the Jund days. For anyone who knows that reference, I'm not going to dig into it too much, but yeah, Jund mirrors, played those a whole lot, and I loved them. They were fun.
Yeah. Yep. That was going to be my example as well. As Jund is excellent example of a format where like if that's the best deck in the format, like that's not the worst thing in the world, because that's a very interactive matchup still. A lot of players are going to have a lot of fun. It's when their decks are like Luxem Xander, or like a weird combo deck that just doesn't have good interaction for it, right? Like that's where you really start to get into trouble in your format, where it's basically who just can, see their key cards faster. There's not really a whole lot of skill in those matchups. I think, and that's really where you get to a weird spot in the format where nobody's having a good time, even if you're winning, right? Like,
yeah, the Luxem Xander mirrors are weird.
Yeah, that actually is probably like a more skill intensive matchup than I alluded to earlier. But like, I think there's a lot going on there. But it also just like, if Luxem Xander is the best deck in the format too, it feels miserable to play a lot of decks into it. So like that, I can see where that would get to be problematic. But again, like there's plenty of checks to it too. So like we're obviously not even close to that situation.
And I think I'm probably going to bring up Luxem Xander in a little bit as well, but let's start talking. Do you want to just talk through category 1's cards and each one, and just kind of like why it's here, and then what we think about it being on the list?
Yeah, let's do that. We'll start with Creative Shock, which is a 3 reserve fire card action, mage spell, fast speed. Draw 2 cards, discard a card, and with class bonus, if a fire element card was discarded, you may choose a unit and deal 2 damage to it. So this is mostly here because it's probably the best card draw in the game currently, in basic elements, I should say. And like, I think it's fine. We're currently in a small format still, right? Like it's a 3-set format, and one of the sets is a very small set as well. So you're just going to have like cards that are just better at certain things than other cards. Like that's just the way it works until the format grows, unfortunately.
That's the way card games work in general. Some things are better than others. That's just how it is.
Yes. Yeah. If we wanted every card to be like the same power level and to have a smaller number of cards, we'd probably be playing a living card game or something. Kind of the joy of card games is like seeing all these different cards and how they interact, even if some of them are worse than others. But yeah, I mean, this is just here because like, you draw 2 cards. If you discard a floating memory, all of a sudden, like you're up a card essentially on card advantage. If you can use that floating memory for something impactful from your material deck, and if you're a mage, it's really good because you get to deal 2 damage to something potentially as well.
Yeah.
Which can kill an ally, just deal 2 to face or whatever. That's worth a lot more than nothing. So it's just a powerful card, but yeah, I don't think it's really overpowered at the moment. There's fire decks where I don't include it. A lot of like my fire Xander aggro decks, I play somewhere between 0 and 2 copies, just because it's like it's nice to filter, but it's also like pretty clunky still, especially for a deck that's trying to be really aggressive and kind of just put your opponent on the back foot. Obviously, in decks like Luxem Xander and Merlin, it's fantastic. It does exactly what you want, but.
Creative Shock is the card that is really the poster child for a lot of people of power level of cards. It's kind of the one they reference as being the strongest card in the game. I'm going to make an argument for that a little later, or against that a little later, actually. But it's a card where I don't think it's wrong to put it in most fire decks, like objectively wrong to put it in most fire decks, because the big argument is that even in highly aggressive fire decks, when you're going first on the first turn, it still is one of the better plays turn 1 when you see it with a floating memory card, or when the fire cards in graveyard matter, which in those decks they typically do. But like you said there, I think it is actually like a little overplayed sometimes as well, where I think it's not necessarily right to just like start every fire list with 4 Creative Shock. 0 to 2 for some of them. A lot of them still, though, I don't, before people get me wrong, I'm not cutting it from my Merlin decks. I'm not cutting it from Erupting. I'm not cutting it from Luxem Xander. Like those, I mean, it is a workhorse of a card, and those matchups sometimes do feel like they come down to how many Creative Shocks did you see early in the game? Like, especially you go an Erupting mirror, and one person starts with 2 creatives, the other person starts with a clunkier hand than that. That matchup tends to lean in one direction pretty quickly at that point, because it, in those matchups in particular, just does everything that you want it to do. It digs for cards, it fills your graveyard, and sometimes puts floating memory in there to keep you up on cards when you are trying to like level to get more value. If you get to do the play where you level to Rye level 1, and then during Recollection, you use the Creative Shock to get that value and then also get the 2 damage off of it. I mean, that stuff is highly impactful in matchups that can really come down to sort of a razor's edge as to who wins and who doesn't. So this card makes perfect sense to me to be in category 1. And the big reason it would move, I don't know if it needs to move up though, because at the end of the day, it is, unless there's something really obscene that people start doing with it, it's just sort of like churning your deck a little bit. Except in pretty particular matchups where it really seems to just like kind of power everything. But then it comes down to like, are those decks overpowered at all because it does that? Because like, if that's just how Erupting gets wins sometimes, well, Erupting should get wins sometimes. It shouldn't just be like a dead deck.
Yep. Yeah. In my opinion, I really see it as like making your high rolls really high and kind of helping you get out of your low rolls.
Yeah.
And I think that's a perfectly fine spot for a card to be. Like, it's not like it's not an auto win into any matchup really, right? Like you said, like if it's an Erupting Mirror, the deck that sees more Creative Shocks is probably going to win because that's the game plan, right? And neither deck is playing any defense for itself. But like against, if you're playing Erupting into like a Luxem Xander, or maybe not a Luxem Xander, but like a Wind Allies or something, it's probably impactful, but it might not be the reason you win the game, right? If you end up winning it.
It's in that game. It's how many innervates did you see actually?
yeah, exactly. Yep. Yes. There's key cards for key matchups. I guess to be fair, Creative Shock helps you find those key cards, right?
Sure does. It sure does. We can't deny that. Like we're not Creative Shock haters. I want to be really clear.
No, not at all. I love Creative Shock. I think it's a very good card. I play it as often as I can actually, because it's a lot of fun. But like your Fire Lorraine aggro decks, right? They're playing Creative Shock because like they want to find their Flame Sweeps because that's an impactful card. Like the filtering is powerful, but it's not to the point where it's so problematic that it just like makes the format miserable.
It's really interesting when you start doing analysis of like card advantage between Creative Shock and cards like Cremation Ritual. Specifically when Cremation Ritual is paired with some of the other allies that those decks tend to run, like Library Witch and Clumsy Apprentice. It ends up being like clearly better because it's a streamlined version of getting that sort of card advantage built right away. It only requires you to see that one card, and it works with things out of hand, and it costs fewer resources. But at the end of the day, it's just not that it's not providing in my estimation, an amount of advantage that makes it like a must get rid of card. And it's going to ultimately, like, just the way I look at things ultimately is like, if Fire is dominating every single top cut and every deck's rocking the Creative Shocks, then I'd start thinking, okay, well, there's clearly a
commonality here.
A common denominator where like these decks are just finding all the good cards more easily, generating that value. That might be what's going on. But there are lots of decks that we see now that don't have Fire in them that are still kicking butt.
Yep.
So it just seems like a good tool that Fire has, and it's a good card and a good tool, but nothing that I think is oppressive.
Yeah. I mean, you know what else is a really good card that lets you see a lot of cards to help filter for things? Rally the Peasants, but we're not sitting here talking about putting this on category 1, right?
We're not ready to have that conversation
yet. Next month, maybe.
Ban Rally the Peasants.
All right. Moving on. Varuck, Smoldering Spire. This is a 3-cost fire domain, unique mage castle with upkeep. Whenever you materialize a card, sacrifice Varuck, and damage dealt by fire element sources you control can't be prevented. So this is a very powerful card, right? I think it is kind of a holdover from set 1, where that was an environment where there was no domain removal. So like once you played it, as long as you didn't materialize a card, it was going to stick around forever unless you were playing against Luxem and they had Excalibur. And it had a very powerful effect where we had a lot of damage prevention sources in set 1 between Arcane Spell Shield, or Spell Shield Arcane, Veiling Breeze, Deflecting Edge, Resolute Stand, actually, once we got FTC.
Yep.
Just a lot of, I think that one's prevention.
Yes.
A lot of effects where like that was how you reduced damage. So it was a very powerful counter to the counters that people normally played for fire decks. I haven't seen this in a list in a very long time.
Jimmy's Fire Tony list ran some, but it makes sense. It's a domain, so it fits perfectly.
And that's the domain deck. Yes. Yeah. Outside of that, I haven't seen it anywhere. So I mean, clearly, it's a very powerful card when you just say, "Hey, you can't stop what I'm doing," right? But there's more answers to it now. ALC has domain removal that you could play if domains became a problem. There's just other ways to reduce damage now as well. Frostbind just stops you from playing the card that would do damage to you. Korhazi Trapper gives -3 to an attack if that's how they're trying to.
Korhazi is so good. Oh, I love that card so much.
Yep. Water actually has a lot of really good non-damage prevention effects that will stop you from taking damage.
That's a conversation people actually aren't ready to have. Water's power level.
Yep, big true.
I want to just interject and interrupt at the same time. So I'm just going to interrupt here. And I want to mention, because I think it's extremely relevant for why Varuck is on the list here, but it also goes back to Creative Shock a little bit too, which is, it's really easy to sit here and just look at like, well, what does this card currently do in the format, and should it be on the list? Should it not be on the list? But that's not actually the whole picture, and that's even how they describe it in the category, which is it's cards that are unhealthy for future balance, and then the important part is end game design space. Mm-hmm. And the reason that another reason Creative Shock might be on the list here is because that access that Fire has to discard that is generally advantageous has already limited the amount of Fire class bonus free floating memory cards that we're seeing. They don't print many of those. And part of the reason they don't is because Fire has Creative Shock, and decks are running Creative Shock because it's an optimal turn 1 on the play for a lot of decks. And when you can very consistently turn 1 on the play Creative Shock, dump a floating memory that you can use to level to 1, that just is an escalating power that can snowball a little bit out of control. So Creative Shock is really on here because if Creative Shock wasn't in the format, they could print those floating memory cards more freely. And it wouldn't be as big of it. There are other ways to discard them, of course, but it wouldn't be as big of an issue for Fire. Varuck is a similar thing too, where the fact that it completely shuts down prevention means that if prevention is a required thing for the format to be balanced, it might make Fire decks too powerful into that as well. So it's affecting game design in that way.
Yep. Yeah. Again, like these are unique effects that, potentially can become problematic in the future. Like you said, just because they're so unique. Although I want to go back to Creative Shock. I agree. It's like, if they want to print more non-class bonus floating memory in Fire in the future, that makes Creative Shock a lot more powerful, right? It just hinders kind of what they can do. I think from what we've seen so far as well, the design philosophy is just that Fire shouldn't have that kind of floating memory in the first place, because they do kind of want these effects where Fire can discard effectively for advantage, and also like eat up cards in their graveyard for other effects rather than just straight paying costs. Like we see that with Rending Flames, and we see that with Airship Cannoneer, Fiery Momentum as well. Like it just lets you kind of you utilize your graveyard in a different way with Fire than you do in Wind and Water.
I think the difference though is that Creative Shock has absolutely no boundaries or hoops to jump through to be able to generate that advantage compared to like all of the other. Look at Fire Tuned Automaton in Guardian is a card that is like it's a 3/1 for 2 that has as an additional cost you have to discard a card from your hand. Very stat efficient damage source for sure, but like, yeah, you can get a discard out of it, but is that is that going to be worth it compared to Creative Shock? The question of whether it's worth it to play Creative Shock is almost never asked because it just simply is good value to do all the time. Outside of when you are pushing damage and you just don't have like the turn to do that.
Yep.
So I think if they were to ban Creative Shock at one point, it would have to be in a situation where there was actually still, reasonable access to some effects like that. Because like you said, Fire is reliant on doing that kind of thing. That's part of their identity. But the thing is, a card that does that kind of draw discard or just discarding ability doesn't have to be as tuned as Creative Shock is. It doesn't have to be quite as just like generically turn one onward potent as Creative Shock is.
Yep. Yeah, I could see Creative Shock costing like 5 in the future, actually. Like if they just wanted to straight up like reprint it for whatever reason.
I would
not reprint it, but like make it a functional, identical card.
I would still play that in some decks.
Yeah,
for sure.
100%. Yeah, exactly. All right. As quick aside, that was a quick aside. Did we want to say anything more about Varuck? But I think we hit a lot of that.
I just think the big reason it's there is just because it's such a blanket. You can't prevent my damage, kind of thing, and the fact that your fire spirit makes all of your champions damage fire element, so it can't be prevented. If Varuck's in play is just like, yeah, like it's not a card that we're expecting to go up at any point, but it's a card that has to be watched because it just makes the way they design cards different. Mm-hmm. The fact that it exists, yep. So. That's good. I'm good there.
Cool. Next we have Dream Fairy, a 3 reserve wind ally mage fairy with stealth. It is a 1/2 with on enter, return target ally you don't control to its owner's memory. Opponents can't activate cards with that ally's name as long as you control Dream Fairy. Again, this is just like a really unique effect that kind of hinders what opponents can do as well. Like it stops their current plan and stops their future plans as well. So again, like this is something that we could easily see becoming problematic in the future. Like if there's any sort of really like easy to play protection for Dream Fairy that just keeps it on the field indefinitely. Right now there's like a plethora of good answers to it in the format, but again, like that's something like if Alliance Gear Shield was a real card, right? Like maybe that makes Dream Fairy
I've tried
more like oppressive.
I've tried to make it a real card, but it still doesn't feel like one. I haven't found the sauce yet for it.
Mm-hmm.
I attacked this card from a little bit of a different angle. The being unable to play the card is certainly like impactful in plenty of situations. Watch the gameplay with Red Zone Rogue next week, actually. So just spoilers. But the thing that I think that really puts Dream Fairy in category 1 here is the fact that this is effectively uninteractable for a lot of decks removal for anything with no real stipulation. And like we saw in FTC, they created the Majestic Spirit, who is an extremely powerful endgame card that is fairly costly to get out. And they've been introducing more, like they had Crawl, they had Neos Elemental. There's a bunch of things that are just like these big, powerful, like kind of endgame cards. And they're generally when you have an ally that's a big, powerful, like, wow, you have to deal with this or it's going to be game over for you. They have to make that card cost an appropriate amount to put out. And so you have to spend a good amount of resources or you have to jump through some hoops in order to play that thing. And having an ally who can just enter the battlefield, remove it from the board for a cost of 3 while also putting a 1/2 with stealth in play, and then occasionally also just says you also just can't even try to play that thing again until you jump through some hoops. That is disproportionately powerful removal for some of the things that it's able to target. And that can make it so like Weebs might not be developing certain endgame allies because we went through testing with this card, but it was never good because the Dream Fairies could just destroy it. And there's no Spell Shroud for on-enter effects. Maybe they'll make one, but until then, that's an example of how the game can be designed in a way where the card could fall off the list. Because what if everything starts having on-enter Shroud or whatever? I don't think, by the way, I don't think that's actually good game design. That's like Bandai level, like game design of like we create an answer and then we create an answer to that answer because the answer we created was way too powerful. I think that's kind of bad game design, but just an example.
Yep. Yeah. No, I think that all makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and there's a reason we don't see like a lot of really cheap, efficient removal in basic elements as well, right? Like the kind of the cheapest and most efficient is like probably like Focused Flames or something, right? Where it's 4 damage for 2 reserve or 1 reserve if you're a mage. You don't get to actually like straight up just destroy a lot of different objects in the game until you get to like advanced elements, and you see things like Excalibur that lets you just blow something up for 2 reserve. Uther is really powerful as well, where it's similar to Dream Fairy, where it comes down with a large, difficult to deal with body, and just removes whatever ally it wants. The difference there is obviously like you have to be Luxem, so that means you've already gone to level 3 most likely, and it costs 4 instead of 3. Like those are actually like really significant hurdles, right? So yeah, Dream Fairy is a very, very efficient card for what it's doing. And there's not really anything else like that at the moment. And doesn't feel good to get your Majestic Spirit or your Crawl or even your Lancelot Dream Fairy. So
or Snow Fairy for that matter. But yeah, Dream Fairy is just like against 2/3s, against random stuff. It just feels like perfectly fine. It's like, yeah, that's a reasonable roadblock to put in my way. But as the power level of the ally it targets gets higher, it feels a lot less fair. So it makes sense why it's on the list, even though it feels really good to play. Like it's a good card.
It's a lot of fun. Let's see. Freezing Hail is next. That is a 2 reserve water action mage spell, fast speed. Deals 2 damage to target unit. That unit doesn't wake up during its controller's next wake up phase. We went over this one a little bit already, but again, it's just like as you see more champions that appear, like Diana and Tenoris, even back when Infusion Lorraine was really popular, it can just be like a really stifling effect against decks like that. Also against decks that are kind of going in on one big ally as well. Like let's say Sylvie was played more often, and you saw a lot of her.
You're going to say playable?
Yeah, it was. And then I decided to be a little bit more charitable.
Thank you, Taylor. The Sylvie fans appreciate you today.
Yeah. I won't be like this every episode, so yeah, you got to enjoy it.
Don't get used to it.
Yep. But like a lot of those decks go all in on one ally, especially like the wind variants, right? Where you'll load up an ally with a bunch of +1/+1 counters or buff counters.
Yeah.
And then you get one swing with it, and now all of a sudden it's not waking up again.
Even just like Sylvie's Pride allies and stuff. They're just like, it's like cards like Snow Fairy are actually more impactful sometimes than those. But decks are more able to tech in like true side effects to deal with those. The Freezing Hail, just the fact that it can rest them. It's only 1 turn, but that is sometimes all you need, or you can chain them or something. Yep. But there's no way to interact with it because the fact that it doesn't wake up is not contingent on the damage being dealt. It just says it deals 2 damage, and regardless of whether the damage was actually dealt or not, that unit doesn't wake up during the next wake up phase, which just means, again, this is kind of like Varuck. It's just like it shuts stuff down, and there aren't like a ton of ways to kind of interact with it. It's just, it just happens. And if a deck ever were to be introduced where it's like really reliant on getting a consistent swing of like 5 damage every turn or something, well, actually Diana is Diana sometimes.
Is Diana. Yep.
Freezing Hail can be, it can just be like, well, if you're playing water, right now I'm playing water and I jam this card in the deck because against Diana, it's so good. It's so sick. And it can also just flexibly be 2 damage to kill Dream Fairy, 2 damage to kill Snow Fairy, 2 damage to just
kill Spark Fairy.
Whatever. What's that?
To kill Spark Fairy.
To kill Spark. Well, yeah, if anyone ever played Spark Fairy. We had a local, shout out to, I think it was Angel, who was doing this, like jamming Spark Fairy every week for a while.
That was excellent.
Yeah, it was always bad, unfortunately. Maybe someday Spark Fairy will be in category 1 instead, though.
But yeah, I mean, if they ever decide to print like effects too that will let you recur cards from the graveyard and bring them back to hand.
Oh,
that is another way to make that really oppressive, where you can more easily just play that every single turn. Like all you have to do is find one copy, right?
That's a great point too. Like a reason why this should be here, because it limits their ability to make effects like that as well, potentially.
Yeah. Like if this was an assassin spell instead of a mage spell, like the new Xander level 2 would be in really, you'd be having a really good time with this.
Oh, that would be gross. I've never thought about that before. That's disgusting. Some decks like Diana just like, well, I'm just going to concede. Like,
it seems really powerful.
Diana can literally never shoot them until she's ready to like win the game. Otherwise, she just gets locked down forever.
Yeah. Yep. Sorry,
the shooty Diana, at least. There's different ways, but
yeah, the Allies deck is probably in okay shape still. But
yeah,
moving on. Next, we have kind of one of the poster childs of this card should be banned. Erupting Rhapsody, a 2-cost fire action, mage skill harmony. Banish any amount of fire element cards from your graveyard. Your champion gets +1 level until end of turn for each card banished this way. And then harmonize. If you've activated a melody card this turn, choose any amount of units and deal level damage split among them. So we already see this card like really just popping off at all levels of competition. It's a very powerful card when comboing with Ember Song and Fireball to kill your opponent out of nowhere. I mean, not nowhere. They see it coming, right? You're spending a good amount of time filling up your graveyard with fire cards, but
I'm ready to hot take whenever you're done talking. So, well, it's not really a hot take, but I'm ready to real talk. This is when I hashtag real talk whenever you're done.
Yeah, no, we'll get it. I have a very, very good idea what you're going to say. So I'll go into kind of the future considerations, like what this possibly is going to prevent weebs from printing, right? Like, it's going to be difficult to like, the Creative Shock works really well with this card, right? Not just because Creative Shock is already good, but Creative Shock puts 2 fire cards in the graveyard by itself for Erupting Rhapsody to combo with. So just more effects like that are difficult to print while like Erupting Rhapsody is around. Mill in a fire deck, like, I mean, it's way outside of fire's identity in the first place, but like self mill just incidentally would be really good in fire because you just get to pump this up for free. And then of course, melody cards, right? You can't print like insane melody cards while this is around, because this just makes it like go crazy. If you look at what we have right now, we have Ember Song, which just deals 2 to an ally. You have Flamebreak Chorus, which gives an ally +2 to an attack, to its attack for the turn. And if you're a tamer, you can activate it at fast speed and like wake your ally up,
which is actually really big and is something people need to be ready potentially to see in Mercurial Heart, depending on how the new Sylvie stuff looks.
Yeah, that is actually like a fairly.
That's actually a really good card.
Yeah,
the fact that you can in Recollection, your Recollection phase, you can use Flamebreak Chorus to have played a melody that turn and then have your whole hand to work with. I mean, that's like spicy. That's saucy.
Yeah, no, that's good. It's very good. And like you do the same thing with like Honed by Fire, so that you can get big rending flames, right? So we've already seen that kind of situation play out. But yeah, it's you can't print like a 1-cost melody that does anything impactful, essentially, right? Because this is in the format. Having to go down to 8 cards. So currently the combo with Erupting Rhapsody, for those who don't know, is generally you need a copy of Ember Song or some other melody. You need at least 1 copy of Erupting Rhapsody, and then depending on if you're like playing into mage or not, you need another copy of Rhapsody or a Fireball. And so that equates to needing a 9-card hand at the beginning of the turn in order to actually combo off and kill your opponent if you've got a stocked graveyard. So even just printing a 1-cost melody that, even if it just said 1 action skill melody and that's it, that's probably playable.
That's playable.
Text box.
That's playable.
Probably playable in Erupting Rhapsody combo, right?
I wouldn't even say probably, because like at the worst case scenario, you just like Tempered Steel, you just like pay 1, put it in the graveyard, like
exactly. Yep.
That's fine.
Yeah. Like that's super good. And then of course, like you get to have another melody in the deck too besides Ember Song, right?
Yeah.
So beyond just like bringing your hand requirement down from 9 to 8, you now have like another combo piece.
Combo consistency, baby.
Yeah.
You also can, you didn't mention it, but you also can go Erupting Rhapsody, Fireball. That's another another option that newer players sometimes miss. But yeah, you don't need the Harmonize. Just play Erupting Rhapsody, go up to a high level, and then double Fireball. That also kills.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can just make your level really huge, and then that's another thing that it prevents, right? Like level scaling effects in Fire have to be kind of contained as well because this is in the format. Fireball is like the big obvious one at the moment, but like even like give your champion plus X attack for each level you have until end of turn or whatever, or plus level attack, I guess is probably how they'd word it. Doesn't matter. Effects like that where they scale off a level are just really powerful with Rhapsody. So it just means that you've got to be careful with that as well. That's a lot of future considerations though, and just kind of how this like limits design space a little bit and how it could become problematic. Let's hear your hot take though.
It's not really it's a hot take for some.
Speak your truth to the people.
Yeah. Let's just talk some facts here about Erupting Rhapsody. So the thing that I think is maybe my most acute take on this is that Erupting Rhapsody is not a combo deck that kills out of nowhere unless you're a new player. And just to give credit, the game should feel like players can access it from a new standpoint and not have a bad experience, right? I'm going to say the biggest knock, absolutely the biggest knock against Erupting Rhapsody is that a new player playing into that deck has basically a 0% win rate. It's not a deck that a new player can win against an experienced player, because the new player has no idea when to actually defend against this, what to even defend with necessarily, and doesn't even necessarily know what the combo is or how it works. But I'm also going to say that is not something that's unique to Grand Archive's Erupting Rhapsody combo deck. Any card game, any TCG that has combo decks, that is the case with them. But in Grand Archive, you can have a material deck that you can search for, and after game one, a new player can go, oh wow, if I had put this card out, then that would have changed things quite a bit. And you can just look and find whatever you want to and play better. And then you can actually start to deal with the deck. The most kills that Erupting Rhapsody gets on any given tournament are against players who are being greedy. A lot of the time. Mm-hmm. That is absolutely not to discredit the people like Matt who perform super well with Erupting Rhapsody, because when you really understand the deck and you understand the lines and the math and everything on a level that I don't even have, you are able to play to those outs so incredibly well, play around your opponent's protection against it a lot better. But at the end of the day, if the opponent plays more conservatively and they put out defense at the proper time, instead of going, I don't think he'll get me this turn, I'll just go ahead and materialize my ring instead. I get another card. I might draw good. I might be able to get him. If your opponent respects Erupting Rhapsody and builds their deck around, including we said earlier, you have to include Nullifying Lantern. I would suggest, if you expect Erupting Rhapsody at a major event, I would put it in the main board. You can, as an option, have one sideboard slot for Quicksilver Amulet. You can, as an option, play Water, which you probably should be anyway, but Water makes it even harder for them to deal with. If you do all that stuff, Erupting Rhapsody still can win, but it has to fight, just like any deck. It has to fight for it. And a lot of the time, it really has to fight for it. Just if you go, okay, this turn I'm gonna put down Lantern, and then this turn put down Safeguard Amulet, which is another card that is good against a lot of decks anyway, and you might be running. So Erupting Rhapsody is a card that makes sense in Category 1, I think. It's a sensible card in Category 1, as Taylor explained all the reasons why it sort of limits card design. It is an explosive deck. It does catch new players off guard. It will catch people off guard who don't respect it in the proper way when they get paired against it. But at the end of the day, this is a combo deck that exists in a format with a myriad of other decks that has seen some success at the high level, but not by any stretch overwhelming success at the high level. And there are lots of people who go into major events playing Erupting who do not reach the high level. It doesn't even have the conversion rate of some of the other decks that people have no problem with whatsoever existing in the format. So it is, I think, a reasonable piece of a metagame where it will check some decks that otherwise wouldn't have a great check necessarily, and it's a metagame call people can make, and it's a deck that requires skill to play and to play against. And so at the end of the day, my real talk, hashtag real talk here is that is a little hashtag for people who are listening. I did a little hashtag thing with my fingers. Is that it's fine and it should be in category 1, but I don't know that it needs to go any higher. I would just watch out for the new players, right? But like if you play against a new player, they're new, just be like, just so you know, this is a combo deck. And maybe you can give them a better game then. If you're that confident in yourself, there's no problem with doing that.
Yep, I completely agree. I like Erupting Rhapsody a lot. I think it's a very powerful deck. I don't think it is currently ban worthy. For all the reasons you stated. Now we have saved the best card in category 1 for last, I would say. With the powerful Scepter of Lumina, which was introduced into the format through Proxy's Vault, which is a mechanism Weaves of the Shore uses to print cards that people can print off and play themselves as proxies in their material deck only, to just address certain concerns they have with the format or spice things up a little bit or what have you. And in this case, this was printed to kind of help water mirrors speed up a little bit. But anyway, Scepter of Lumina is a 1 memory cost water regalia item, Cleric Scepter. And as long as each player controls a water element champion, you may activate this card from your material deck. Whenever your champion levels up, deal 4 damage to target champion you don't control. And then you can pay 5 reserve and banish Scepter of Lumina to draw 2 cards.
I just want to jump in real quick and just say the first line confuses people all the time. If you haven't experienced this card yet, the first line that you can activate this if each player controls a water element champion, that does not restrict you from materializing it against any deck. The that line is one where Weebs has worded it very correctly for the rules of the game, but not intuitively for players, because a lot of players think that means you can only use this against water decks if you're playing water, but it allows you against those decks to activate it during your main phase, in addition to whatever you materialize that turn. Yep. Whereas against any deck, you can just materialize it like normal.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Go ahead, Taylor, with your analysis.
Yeah. I mean, so this has been a staple in water decks since it was printed. A lot of people would say it has put water decks kind of on the map and is like the main reason why they're currently competitive. I don't know if I would quite say that's the case. I think water actually has been slept on throughout the entirety of the game so far, but it definitely is a very powerful card. I think it is the most powerful card currently in category 1. It might be the most powerful card currently in the game. And it's just very, very good. Dealing 4 damage again, just for like playing the game out as you want to, is really powerful. Like most decks want to level up their champion. So when you can just like deal 4 damage each time you level up to your opponent not for free, but like for a fairly low cost, that's just really powerful. And then in addition to that, like having the backup plan of being able to banish it and draw 2 cards is like not unreasonable either. There's a lot of like grindy matchups, especially like water mirrors, where that becomes a really good play, especially when you're staring down a deck probably playing Fracturize, right? So this card just has a lot going for it. Very powerful, can deal a lot of damage out of nowhere with cards like Dungeon Guide, where you can level up on your turn for your materialization phase, deal 4 damage. You can Dungeon Guide, deal 4 damage, attack with Dungeon Guide, and then Dungeon Guide again if your hand is big enough to deal another 4 damage for a total of 12 damage in 1 turn off of Scepter of Lumina alone. So clearly that's just like a really powerful card, and the thing that is just insane about it is that you have access to it every game because it's in your material deck. Like you don't have to worry about drawing it. If you want to play Scepter of Lumina, you have that ability every single game. So it's just a super consistent card as well. So just it's doing a lot of things right now. So just even not even considering what it's constraining Weebs from printing in the future, it's already, I think it kind of warrants category 1 on power level alone. but it also just kind of constrains what they can do, right? Like dungeon guide effects now are hard to print. Like you have to be careful with those. You kind of have to be careful with those anyway, because that's a very powerful effect just by itself. Like leveling up out of the materialization phase and giving, like, essentially taking an extra materialization phase is a very powerful effect just by itself. But Scepter of Lumina plays super well with that. Let's see, anything that like lets you manipulate your hand size more, or like, I don't know, anything that lets you more easily activate that like last effect, I guess, actually is just kind of big too. You don't ever see draw two cards, or you don't see draw two cards very often, right, in the game currently, just because of the way the resource system works and having to pay for cards with cards from your hand through reserve. So that's potentially really powerful as well. There's just a lot of ways you can go off the rails, I think.
I think this is the best card in Grand Archive. I have been saying that for a little while, but I think this card represents so much damage that is difficult to it's difficult to interact with for a lot of decks. I mean, this is why Safeguard Amulet is one that you consider in your main board now for many decks. This is another reason why you should. And mostly it's that damage is not just difficult to interact with, but sometimes difficult to accurately predict the amount of damage your opponent is able to deal in a future turn. It really kind of comes down to like, well, I just hope they don't have one or two dungeon guides in their hand because I can't possibly defend myself against that much non-attack damage in a turn without having Safeguard Amulet out, which maybe you should have respected and put the amulet out, but that's beside the point. Really, it's just a card that changes those matchups to the point where water ally mirrors often feel like they come down to who drew the Fracturize and who didn't. If only one player draws the Fracturize, the player who drew the Fracturize has high odds of taking that game typically, because as long as they're both just kind of putting allies down and doing whatever, one player is going to be 4 to 12 damage higher than the opponent by the time you get to the end of that game. Or more, like we saw with the Water Assassin deck, they used Poison Dagger to change that damage from 12 to 15 in a single turn, +1 from the dagger, 16 in a single turn, +4 from the 2 dungeon guides. That's 20 damage. Like that, this card was 15 of the 20 damage. Like the proposition of you spend a card early, you dump a card early to materialize this. You lose the slot in your material deck too, but you one card in like that nebulous cost of 1 slot in your deck to add up to 12 damage across the course of a game, doing something that you often are already rewarded for doing anyway, because leveling to a higher champion generally gets you effects that you like and stuff like that.
Yep.
And when you want to, like I've tried to spurn to Ash's Scepter and the opponent had 5 cards in hand and I was like, no, I'm dumb. This sucks actually, because they just go in response, draw 2, and like, fair enough.
That's such a terrible feeling, like, because you have to remove it, otherwise you're going to take a ton of damage.
Yep.
But they just are like, oh, sick, draw 2 cards and you're down a card. So it sucks to suck.
Yeah, it's another card. Grand Archive is full of these cards where good players play it better. That's just like you don't just slam it down and you're already optimal in how you play it in Grand Archive. This is the case with so many things, but that was one where I got to experience that. I was like, yes, I remember now. I'm not as good as you. That was a very good play. I'm pretty impressed, and you win. I think that was Ryan who did, back to the start of the podcast. I think it was Ryan who did that to me at Nationals. I'm like, yep, you deserve to win. I accept.
You earned this one.
Yeah, it's an incredible card. It is definitely one to watch, because if water continues to get more potential to deal damage, or more cards that can interact with this, it's just like it lowers water's threshold of the amount of damage they have to do to the opponent compared to other elements. I agree though. Like playing water allies, I have games where I don't materialize it at all. It just doesn't work out with the hand, and I still win those games. It's not a required card, but damn if it isn't making my win rate higher. Like it's it's an extremely good card, and I think of all the cards on the list, the one that deserves to be watched the most, in my opinion.
Yep. Yeah, I completely agree. It's a very powerful card. It's a card that you always are very happy to have access to, even if you don't need to play it or don't want to play it. There's very few water decks where I would not include this in the 80. There's a couple water decks where there's a strong-ish argument for including it in the sideboard instead of the main board.
Yeah.
But like, it's gonna be there still. So yeah, and propelled the deck of the first U.S. national champion Christian. So like, just very, very powerful card. Very cool, very good, very awesome. It's fun to see. I had one more thing I was going to say about it, but its interaction with Diana too specifically is like also insane, just because like she's already bursting to 3, and like the amount of damage she can do on her burst turn is insane, because she's going to drop a Shadow's Twin probably too and smack you for a bunch of damage with that on top of the Scepter damage. So
the fact that Diana can have an 8, if you have a Diana that gets that 8 card hand set up and has 2 dungeon guides in hand, and that 8 card hand with 2 dungeon guides is all she needs to burst and destroy you in one turn. For people who aren't familiar, it's fun to go through it, so I'm going to.
Yes, please do.
Materialize phase, materialize to level 1, 4 damage. Okay, you could have a floating memory for that or whatever, that's fine. Dungeon guide, go to level 2, get a bullet when she goes to level 2. That's what she does. Diana level 2. Deal 4 damage with Scepter. Attack with Dungeon Guide for 1 more, so we've dealt 9 damage so far. Then play your second Dungeon Guide. Go to level 3. She becomes distant. So it does 4 more damage. At that point, so we've dealt 13. 14 with the swing from the Dungeon Guide, the second Dungeon Guide. So dealt 14 damage. Then use the Lineage Release from Diana level 1. Get your Shadow's Twin out. Then load the bullet that you materialize. It could be like Cascading Round, which is a plated bullet or whatever, 2 damage bullet. So load the 2 damage bullet into Shadow's Twin because of the trigger and the distant. You shoot with Diana now for a 7 damage shot on top of the 14 damage we dealt for just a 21 damage turn. That can happen when people are just chilling on level 1 or whatever still, and just like you go from 0 to dead in 1 turn. If you've done anything else in that game to deal any damage, most champions are dead at that point with no interaction, which is why you have to respect Scepter Lumina. You have to put out Safeguard Amulet. You have to protect yourself, because Safeguard Amulet there just shuts the whole turn down. She's just not going to do it. She's not going to Dungeon Guide, because it'll just stop the 4 damage from the level, and then she'll go, okay, your turn, or whatever, or just do something else.
Just pass, probably. Yeah.
Pass and kill you. Try to kill you next turn.
Yep. Maybe play something defensively. Who knows? But yeah, I mean, Safeguard Amulet, very good answer to Scepter. Like, and again, it's what I really like about some of these cards we've noticed, or I talked about so far. Scepter of Lumina, Erupting Rhapsody, especially. They have very strong answers that you can play in the material deck, so you always will have access to those as well if you choose to have it. Right? Like, it's nice you don't have to sit there and hope you draw the out, because the out is in the deck. You can just choose to play whenever you want. So. That helps contain these cards a lot as well, right? Like, I think both of these cards would feel much worse if you had to play Safeguard Amulet and Nullifying Lantern in your main deck and like hope you see it in time to stop what they're doing. Like, these would feel very overpowered. So yeah, just super awesome cards that are very powerful, that are fun to play, that are not quite really at ban-worthy level yet, according to Weaves of the Shore. So, and I agree. They're very good, but not quite there. Moving on, next is Category 2. This category contains cards that we consider very problematic and are heavily watched for potential future legality changes and category shifts. There are not any cards currently in Category 2. The big reason for that is that every single card that has been put into Category 2 has moved to Category 3 in relatively quick fashion. So in my kind of how I interpret that is that if a card goes to Category 2, is that it's probably going to be banned in the next announcement.
You have about 1 month with it.
Yep. If you see a card in Category 2, that's generally your sign, like, okay, hey, get ready to do what you need to do to move on from this card if you're a big enjoyer of it at the moment. It's probably not long for the format, so I don't know if there's too much more to add to that really, other than this is kind of it's almost like the ban list waiting room.
I think cards cannot end up getting banned. It would just require like some major event to happen where we see, oh, there's an innovation where we've come up with a deck now that just like really checks that, and it's actually not as big of a deal now. So it's like they put it in there. I mean, it is the waiting room. Is they put it in there, and it's basically like, okay, now we're just going to review your files, and we'll find out if you get banned in 1 month. We just like you're about to get banned. So if something, if you can make bail, you'll be okay. But otherwise, you're out of here.
Yep, exactly. I do want to reiterate too, that all the cards that we've talked about so far, the ones in Category 2 and Category 1, they are not currently banned.
Yes.
So that's the big, kind of question I see a lot is just like what cards, which of these categories, what do they mean? So far, they don't mean anything as far as card legality goes. All these cards are still legal.
But the cards we're about to talk about, the last cards we're going to talk about today, are in fact already banned. And I don't know if we have to go too into detail. It'll probably be pretty quick explanations of these cards, but they all make sense.
Yes. Category 3. This category will contain all cards that are banned and restricted, proving to be too powerful or too impactful, and limiting tournament deck diversity and meta health. Currently, Sword of Avarice, Reckless Conversion, and Crystal of Empowerment are banned. Again, these cards you cannot currently play in Grand Archive official tournaments. Anything you're signing up currently in Omnidex for, you cannot have these cards in your main deck, or you're going to have issues if they do a deck check or you try to play them against your opponent. So they say banned and restricted. Again, we don't know. They haven't restricted any cards yet. I expect
we have
that
no idea why they
happen.
say that.
I mean, so they take a lot of things from Magic. Like they take a lot of inspiration from Magic, right? So I think that's just where it came from. Magic has a banned and restricted list, even though in that game too, restricted only refers to one format that very few people play. Right. In general, every single card is just straight up banned, and you can't play any copies of it. And honestly, I don't hate it, because like it does leave that door open. Like maybe they find some good reason for that, or maybe someday in the future, Grand Archive is super successful and it's 10 years old and they've got another vintage format as well, similar to Magic, where they want to let every single card be legal, but the most powerful cards need to be restricted. Like I could see that happening. I don't hate it, but it does make things a little bit more confusing for people for sure.
I am so ready to play Sword of Avarice again in this crazy old vintage Grand Archive format.
Yeah, me too.
Come on, I'm excited about that.
Yeah, same here.
Let's do that. Like, I'm ready. Wake me up in 7 years or whatever.
Yes. Sword of Avarice too is actually like a really good example of a card that I think was a Category 1 card for a really long time, just because of how it constrains design space, right? Like it's not necessarily a card that was too powerful for the format where it was just completely warping everything. And don't get me wrong, it was a very powerful card and it was used very effectively in a lot of decks. But it wasn't a card you had to play. But they've decided, Weebs has decided it's too much value to put into the material deck for free, and with the way like Crux interacts with these cards as well.
With the way Spirit Blade Ascension exists.
Yes.
There were just few reasons, even with Prismatic Edge, which is still a playable strategy at the high level, ascensioning Prismatic Edge, as Taylor is very well aware of. Even with that in the format, there were still often few reasons to go Prismatic Edge instead. So that's just how much better Sword of Avarice was. It was like, well, I should just actually do Avarice instead, because I can go infinite with this.
Yep. Yeah. Drawing 2 cards every turn or every activation of Spirit Blade Ascension, which fuels more Spirit Blade Ascensions and Crux sites to find Spirit Blade Ascensions, just like really put the game out of control. So it makes a lot of sense why it's here. Reckless Conversion is a mage spell, arcane, that is also extremely powerful. Like both Sword of Avarice and Reckless Conversion were not banned strictly for power level. Like a lot of it was just the gameplay patterns that they promoted. Both of these cards basically just led to like 10-15 minute turns, as like one person sat there taking a lot of actions and the other person just kind of sat there watching. So it wasn't like a ton of fun to watch these turns play out, even if there were like counterplays and stuff. It was not a fun environment to be part of. Again, a reckless conversion is a card that, like, where you draw 2 cards in your memory, you banish 4 at random from it, and then you scoop all your memory back up into your hand. And in Arcane Rye decks, like, it was just super effective because you were playing a ton of cards each turn. You were drawing a lot of cards with things like Arcane Disposition and Careful Study.
Yep.
And Pure into Mana, and just drawing a ton of things. So your memory was always full, and then you just scoop it all up and you do it all over again. And your opponent just has to sit there like numb and watching all this happen.
Oh yeah, I've done that. Yep. I just watching, like, well, I mean, maybe they won't draw any of their Arcane Blasts in the 30 cards that they're drawing this turn. So we'll see. And no, I died every time.
Yep. Yeah.
I think both this and Avarice would just generally let those respective decks win about a turn faster than they could without. So, like, it wasn't entirely because of play patterns, because I think those just, like, banning these just sort of blunted the decks just enough to give a little more play in the matchup. But it also, I mean, conversion turns were boring to play against. Just like, all right.
Yeah, they were both put on category 3 at the same time as well.
Yep.
Like, Reckless was really the one that needed to go, I think. And Avarice, I think, had to go as well, because like Arcane Rye was pretty much a check on Crux at the time.
Yes.
So, like, had Reckless gone, I think you would have had a really horrible format where everybody's just playing a lot of Spirit Blade Ascension, and
that would have been a
really
Crux
miserable time.
Yeah, Crux dominated format, because there were definitely decks that checked the ally decks at the time too, that could just, they could afford. The thing about the sort of Avarice decks was that they could afford to just power level really fast, just like Rye could. They get down to a low hand size, as long as their low hand size included like 2 Ascensions, then suddenly the next turn they're like, yeah, back at like 9 cards, I have 28 health, and I'm just going to control you now until I win the game.
Yep.
Especially Merlin at that time too. Like, yeah, that would just allow Merlin to go, whoops, here's a deer. So good game, ally deck.
Yep. Oh, that was fun, wasn't it?
Yep.
And then the final card in category 3 is Crystal Empowerment. Again, like, this fueled a lot of really, really strong Lorraine ally decks, where you could just be on level 1 Lorraine. You can pop Crystal of Empowerment out, get +2 level, and then play a bunch of Batter Knights and swing for a lot. Pumped up your sweeps as well, if like that was something you needed to do. Like, it's a very versatile card that was kind of it was printed to like make mage decks a little bit more, give them some flexibility in how they work with their level mechanic. You get a bigger fireball for a turn if you need it, or you can get a cool Pure into Mana turn or something. And turns out it's also really, really good at just enabling other like level bonuses that people weren't thinking about.
They banned this because it made Sylvie too powerful.
That is the most copium thing I've ever heard in my entire life.
Tenoris copium emoji. React to that. The other thing about this card was that in the Merlin decks that have basically eternally been a third to a fifth, or a third to half of the metagame at every tournament since Merlin existed, because of just how, like, it's just a good mid-range deck that you can play. Crystal Empowerment would allow those decks to kill generally a turn sooner using fireballs at Merlin level 3 than they would otherwise, which I didn't think that was particularly egregious, but it was a thing that happened. And likewise, this was used in erupting decks to get erupting to lethal range a little faster, until Nationals, when everybody simultaneously realized that actually Harp of Discordia is Discordia Harp of Malice is just Crystal of Empowerment for erupting, but sometimes better, actually.
Yeah. Every once in a while you get up to 3 or 4 counters on that thing and get even more bonus levels. So
yeah. But it's specific to playing the erupting, the harmony melody, the music package, where Crystal of Empowerment is just like, I'll just slam this out there and everything's super lethal now. Sorry.
So this quick aside, some of these like wind ally decks could totally play Discordia as well, because Attune with the Winds is Melody or Harmony.
Song of Nurturing. Also
Song of Nurturing, same thing.
Yeah. Ooh, we got a little sauce here.
You actually only need one activation to get one level to get your Banner Knights online. So you don't even need that like to hit that many.
You're level 1, you materialize the harp, you Song of Nurturing the board, and then you I guess maybe you play Banner Knights before and your opponent's like, I don't care about that thing. They're not even level 2 yet.
They're just chilling. And
then you suddenly Song of or Attune with the Winds the board, and then your Banner Knights are online and you just crash for 1 million damage. Yeah, that's interesting. I like it.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I think that's probably being slept on. So if you guys stuck around to the end of this podcast, take that to your locals this week and see what happens. Let's experiment a little bit. Let's go a little crazy.
I mean, just actually talking about Sylvie. I'm sorry, Taylor, to talk about Sylvie a little bit, but we were talking about Flamebreak Chorus earlier in the podcast. And Sylvie certainly, I actually did like Crystal of Empowerment. If you're trying to play with her Pride mechanic, it was very good. There's pieces there that could be put together for something. It still might want to wait until the Recollection decks.
Yeah.
But there's something there to think about.
If you're like a little masochistic, start looking at those play patterns with Harp now, with Discordia now. Otherwise, if you are, mostly like sane, just kind of wait until the Recollection deck comes out, and then, Sylvie's probably going to be playable then. So
I'm sorry. I hope that our audience is a little masochistic, because I love when people mess around with wild decks like that. That's like when I saw the Sylvie that like topped the online, well, it was like an online event, or it was just Water Allies, but with Sylvie and Alan. It was like, really this is cool. Like, this is really sweet.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm not trying to like dissuade anybody from brewing or anything like that, because that's how cool stuff happens in formats, right? Is like people try these ideas out and they see if they work or not, right? And they find the ones that do and they go with those.
Yep.
So by all means, like real talk, put Discordia and, put that and Sylvie together and figure out what's going on. Find something really cool that no one else is doing in the format and kind of take everybody by storm. Like that is, I mean, that's actually like, somewhat of a really cool innovation that could be made. But it's also not for me. So
yeah, the game takes all types of players, and Taylor is not one of the Sylvie types of players.
Yep. But yeah, I mean, I think that wraps up our ban list conversation here. Any other kind of final thoughts here, Dan, as we wind down?
I wondered if we should talk about if we think anything really should be on the list, but I think we both have about the same answer to that, which is, I mean, there's probably a couple of cards that I could see in category 1, like maybe some like Luxem card, you could like Luxem Sight or something. You can maybe say like, this could be oppressive, eventually for if we don't have checks for Luxem, but at the same time, we do have some checks for Luxem. So
exactly.
It's
I'm not too concerned about individual cards getting onto category 1. I appreciate Weaves of the Shore's transparency in letting us know that like these are potentially problems in the future. But in my opinion, it's not, if a card goes on category 1, it just died. I ignore it, to be honest, because it doesn't actually mean anything until it's at category 2. And then I'm like, all right, so something's going to happen here pretty soon. Yeah. Like Crystal Empowerment, when that went up to category 2, it's kind of just like counting down the days. And then it did get banned, and I was like, okay, well then, that makes sense. So until something's there, I'm just not really feeling it. And I can't think of any cards I would start to even put a category 2 and be like, hey, this is on a clock now. The format's in a really, really healthy spot. There's not really any, anything that's really hurting, like saying you need to play this or you need to play this counter to this, otherwise you'll lose the game. I mean, that's not true, I guess. It's like Erupting Rhapsody kind of says you need to play Nullifying Lantern in your 80 somewhere, right? But that's such a small cost too. Like, it's not like you have to, really warp your deck to fight this other deck. You have to include one card in one slot that you always will have access to. So
on the flip side, Erupting often has to warp its deck pretty significantly just to fight through Fracturized Lantern.
Exactly. Yeah. Like we had Arasana in the top 32 in multiple copies. Astra in top 32 of nationals because
Arasana top 8 nationals even.
Yes.
Arasana top 8 nationals.
Top 2'd actually.
Top 2'd nationals. Yes. Wow. Arasana is such a contender. I mean, the deck wasn't ever able to level to Arasana, but she was in the material deck.
It was technically an Arasana deck, is how I would describe it.
That's how Omnidex described it. For
exactly.
Sure.
Yes.
But yeah, I agree. You know, I like that. I like the category 1. It just lets me know what Weebs is thinking. It lets me, it lets us have a podcast where we can talk a lot about what we think they're thinking and everything. But I also don't put I don't look into it too much. If anything, I look at them and go, oh yeah, I should probably remember to play those cards. They're pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, the coolest thing I like about category 1 is it kind of gives you a little bit of insight into like their design process, right? Like what they're thinking about, kind of what each identity, like element identity has going on. Just like gives you a little bit of behind the scenes look, a little, if that's interesting to you. So.
It is interesting to me.
Yes. Well, thank you for coming on this journey with us, listeners and viewers. I hope it was interesting for you. I certainly love talking about just like card design in general. So this is just talking about like why a card would need to be banned is kind of interesting.
This was a great topic, Taylor. I appreciate you bringing this one up. However, I am about to be mad at you because now I have to go put all the card images into this podcast. So, viewers, if you got to see a lot of card images, you're welcome. Oh boy, this is going to take a bit of time.
Yep. Sorry, not sorry. This is what you get for quality products. So
that's fair.
But yeah, thank you everyone again for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks on Friday again this time. It's actually going to be Friday. I'll hold Dan's feet to the fire. I know we were a little late last time, so
if it's not up to, if this isn't up tomorrow, it's because of the card images.
Okay, that's actually fair. But yeah, anyway, we'll be back in 2 weeks. Thanks everyone for joining us on the Recollection Step, and we'll see you next time.
Bye everyone.